What's up, everybody? You're watching Model Aviator. My name's Adam, and this week we have another brand new release from HobbyKing. Before we get to this gorgeous Spitfire, though, I've got some great news for all our friends from the UK. I was told that there is finally a cheaper shipping option to your country from HobbyKing. I've got to thank our friend Martin Lay of the Flanker Tanker channel for doing the groundwork for us. He lives in the UK and was nice enough to put a bunch of airplanes from HobbyKing in his cart and check the shipping costs, then send us the links so we could see it. So Martin, thank you so much for doing that. It is significantly cheaper than what it used to be. It's not free shipping, which would be absolutely perfect, so it's not perfect, but it is now reasonable. No more crazy $200 and $300 shipping costs to get something like this to your door. And I have a feeling that some of you folks in the UK might be interested in this. Today we're honored to have a brand new release. It is an example of one of my favorite airplanes, well, my favorite airplane ever, a Supermarine Spitfire. This one is from HobbyKing. It is DuraFly's latest warbird, the Supermarine Spitfire Mk IIa. This is not the first Spitfire that DuraFly's made. In fact, I had their first. It was a Mark I. Here is a couple pictures of the ones that I had. And losing that airplane was something that just absolutely broke my heart. It was my favorite 1100mm warbird of all time that I have ever owned. And the way I lost it is the craziest thing. My neck strap hook got caught in the power switch of my transmitter, went to straighten my neck strap out. I was on a right to left trimming pass, and it flipped my transmitter off. By the time I realized the transmitter was off, gone, never to be found. I'm not sure where that thing ended up, but it just really broke my heart, and I was absolutely elated and honored when we found out that this would be DuraFly's latest warbird, and we were getting one to review for all of you. So glad to have this back in our hangar. Now, there are some differences in a Mark I Spitfire and a Mark II. The Mk IIa Spitfire had improvements up front over the Mark IIa that made it a much more effective combat aircraft. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin 12 was far more advanced than the Merlin 3 of the Mark I and could run on 100 octane fuel, use more boost. They also changed to a more aggressive prop on the Mark II, which increased the airplane's climb rate by more than 800 feet per minute, made it an airplane that could go higher, climb faster, and accelerate faster than many of its contemporaries. The decals that come with this particular Mk IIa Spitfire depict an airplane flown by William Dunn of the number 71 Squadron, the Eagle Squadron, the very first Eagle Squadron. That was a group of American volunteers that flew for the RAF before America was committed to World War II. When DuraFly's original Spitfire, the Mark I, came out, there was a lot of talk about how accurate the mold was. People were really impressed, as was I, of just how scale they got the airplane. They got the flaps right. They got the curvature and the little idiosyncrasies of the underside of the fuselage at the trailing edge of the wing right, which nobody gets right. They did take liberties to make it fly better as a model, but none of the over-the-top things that other companies had done, and the combination that they chose rendered the most accurate foam Spitfire anybody had ever seen. Well, the Mark II, being from the same mold, is no exception. It is a super accurate Spitfire, and it doesn't hurt that it's now powered on 4-cell versus the original 3-cell. So not only does it look good, but it goes good. And speaking of looks, let's check out the specs and show you just how beautiful and accurate this thing really is. DuraFly's Mk IIa is a full-featured warbird. It has scale split flaps, retractable main gear, and LED lights on the wingtips, as well as a beacon on top of the fuselage. Its wingspan is 1100mm or 43.3 inches. Its length is 1000mm or 39 inches. Our example weighs 3 pounds, 0.1 ounce or 48.1 ounces, ready to fly, with an HRB 4-cell 2230C pack. It's equipped with 6 9-gram digital servos. It has a 11.25 by 7 inch scale 3-blade prop. The motor is an Aerostar 3636 770 kV. The ESC is an Aerostar 50 amp. I'm going to share a neat feature of the DuraFly Spitfire with you, and then we'll get to the assembly. It has to do with cooling. If you'll notice, the very front of the nose of the airplane is ever so slightly larger in circumference than the rear of the spinner, and there's also a bit of a gap there. That is intended to get cooling to the motor and the ESC. You'll also notice there are little slots in the very front of the exhaust stacks. Those pull in air that go through holes in the fuselage where the exhaust stacks mount, and that gets cooling to the battery. I just thought that was a really brilliant way of getting cooling where you need to get it, but keeping scale fidelity. While assembling the DuraFly Mark II is a little bit more involved than some, it's still a pretty easy assembly. There's only 7 screws outside of your prop and spinner assembly, 4 for the main wing, 2 for your horizontals, and 1 to join the 2 elevator halves in the center. The other stuff that you have to do is pretty much gluing on all that scale fidelity. You will need to glue on the exhaust stacks, and yes, Miss Heidi painted those before we put those on. They look good out of the box, but not quite that good, but you can change that on yours. You'll have to glue on your rear view mirror. We suggest taking a pin vise and drilling a tiny hole for the little extension on the bottom of the base to go through. That'll give you a much more secure bond there. We actually used, I think, welder's cement to put that on. You'll have to glue on your antenna. We used medium CA for that. You'll have to glue on your radiator cover and your oil cooler. With the radiator cover, we simply use welder's cement to do that. With the oil cooler, it's a tight enough fit. We just seeped thin CA in there to secure that. You'll also need to glue on your pitot tube. We used medium CA to do that as well. And of course, you'll have to install whatever decals that you choose to install. You can use the ones that come with it like we did, or you can outsource them and do it as whatever Mark I or Mark II Spitfire that you choose. You have to install the push rods on the wing of the Spitfire. It's a pretty simple system, an L-bend on one end, an adjustable ball link on the other. Very easy to get them to the right length, and it's very obvious right out of the package which 2 are intended for flaps and which 2 are intended for ailerons. The only tricky part of the assembly for me was installing the receiver. Now, even though this airplane has an 1100 millimeter wingspan, it isn't as big as some 1100 millimeter warbirds because the Spitfire in and of itself is a smaller fighter. It's very, very sleek. That means that inside our hatch, there's just not a whole lot of room. Once you account for the battery and where you're going to stow the battery wires, there's not much room left running this thing on 4-cell now versus the 3-cell of the original DuraFly Spitfire. It's much more powerful now. There's just not a lot of room for the receiver. Now, you can put a receiver in there if you want to. It's just going to make it fiddly getting the battery in and having a place to put the wires. So rather than do that, I elected to put the receiver inside the fuselage before I put my wing on. Found a creative place to put it. Had to rearrange some wires so that they wouldn't get tangled up in the rudder and elevator servo, but once I rerouted those wires and got them where I wanted them, it's pretty easy install to put the receiver in there. I'll give you a little tip when it comes to gluing anything or sticking anything onto the inside of any EPO airplane. I use double-sided servo tape to install all my receivers in foamies. This one was no different. A lot of people have a hard time getting glue joints to work and getting things like that to stick in the inside of an EPO airplane. And the reason being, all these EPO airplanes come out of the mold with a compound on them that's kind of oily, that makes separating the pieces from the mold easier. Well, the outside of the airplane gets a good cleaning before they paint it so that the paint will stick, but a lot of times they don't bother doing that to the inside of the airplane. So if you're going to stick anything on it, you need to first rub it with rubbing alcohol, and then second, take a very fine grit sandpaper and sand the area that you intend to stick whatever it is you're trying to either glue or, in my case, stick on there, and you will get a very good adhesion. So just a little tip there. That was really the only fiddly part, was just figuring out a good place to put the receiver that makes putting the battery in a lot easier. So now it's time to get to the flying. As always, we'll have our setup page right before the flying starts, so that will be next, and then you'll see some pretty cool footage. We're going to show you our Maiden takeoff, landing, and stall tests. Then we'll go to a completely different venue where we did a scale flight really early in the morning. Has kind of a dawn patrol feel to it. You get to see a lot of this beautiful shape as a silhouette. Just a really good scale flight that I'm decently proud of. I hope you like that. And then I kind of come out of my shell later that same day, and you'll see a very short flight where we show you kind of the max performance of this airplane. I do a punch and go takeoff that's not scale at all. It shows you that you could actually hand launch this thing. I mean, it's off the ground in like a foot or two. And I do some tumbling, knife edge it, low inverted pass, just stuff like that. Stuff that a sport pilot that's not really interested in scale but wants a Spitfire might do with this. So check out the setup page, check out this flying footage, and we'll see you back here and give you our final thoughts on this gorgeous Spitfire. Here's our maiden takeoff. Based on all the hours I put on the original DuraFly Spitfire, I had a pretty good idea how I wanted to set this airplane up before we ever flew it. Here's our first clean stall test. You'll see it drops a wing pretty decent to the right, but it's an easy recovery. All you have to do is relax the back pressure. And same thing again, that time I released the pressure a little sooner so it flew out of it sooner. Here's our dirty stall, same thing, drops the right wing. And we'll turn it around and do the same thing again. And get the same result. The sooner you're off the back pressure and you unload the airframe, the sooner it just flies right out of it. Here's our maiden landing. Not too bad. Again, remember, with this particular type of airplane, got a lot of time, so this went pretty well. We're at a different venue now, and this is an early morning dawn scale flight. There's something about this time of morning. The winds are calm, it's beautiful. You gotta love it. Spitfires are not the easiest tail draggers to handle on the ground, particularly off of a smooth surface, but with proper technique and practice, it becomes second nature and easy, just like any other airplane that you get used to.
the silhouette of a Spitfire's elliptical wings grooving through the sky. It's one of the prettiest sights in aviation, in my humble opinion. The added power on the 4-cell upgrade with this model enables you to do a lot of different things. It helps very much in scale flying because it allows you to come into a maneuver at a slower speed and then maintain your momentum, or at least mimic maintaining momentum, even though it's a small model that has very little. I like that. I tend to say this about any airframe that I'm really impressed with, and the Spitfire epitomizes that. The DuraFly Mk IIa is just a good, honest airframe. It goes where you point it, it's predictable, it does exactly what you ask it to do, exactly the same way, every time, so long as you do your part. And bear in mind, there's no stabilizer here. This is just a good airframe with a good setup. Some of you observant viewers, I'm sure, have noticed how awesome the LED wing lights look. You might have noticed that you can't see the beacon on top. Well, that's because yours truly tested everything before I put the wing on, but when I did the final assembly, I forgot to plug it up. And I didn't notice until after we reviewed the flight footage. If scale flying is not really your thing, that's how easy it is to get the Mk IIa off the ground if you just punch and go. What you're going to see me doing this flight is not what I would usually do with a warbird. It's kind of not my thing to sport fly them, but for a lot of people it is. And if you like to throw your warbirds around the sky, the DuraFly Spitfire has got the chops for it. Here's a full speed pass with a maximum performance climb. As you can see, it just goes and goes and goes. I finally get bored with it and pull it over the top. Could have kept it going if I just wanted to. After this little hammerhead, we're going to go into some bonus footage of us showing you how the Spitfire does off grass. Now, this grass is short. It's a rough field, but it's cut very short, and the Spitfire does well. If the grass is really long, the landing gear strut covers catch it, so you may have to take those off. And here's our grass landing. Like I said, the Spitfire does really well so long as the grass is short. If it's taller, taking the gear strut covers off, it's only 3 screws, takes less than a minute to take them both off and put them back on.
There's just something about a Spitfire, the way they groove through the air, the graceful, smooth way that they just dominate the airspace that they're in. It gets me right there every time. I just love them. And the DuraFly Mk IIa is an excellent example of that. This epitomizes what a Spitfire is really all about. I love the fact that it's 1100 millimeter size. That's an easy size to store and transport with it together, so there's no assembly at the field. And I love that it is an early Mark. The Mark I's and the Mark II's, the Battle of Britain Spitfires, were the shorter nose Spitfires, the prettier Spitfires of all of the Marks. And they all look good, but when they started shoehorning the bigger engines in the Mark IX and above, the nose got much longer and thicker, and they started doing things with the rudder, and it just didn't look quite as graceful and just absolutely perfect as the early Marks. Love the fact that it comes naked, so you have your choice of decals so that you can do a Mark I or a Mark II. That's a really nice feature. And our experience with our example was very, very good. We received it. All the parts were in good nick, packaged very, very well. The assembly went very smooth. The fit and the finish is very good. The only stumbling block was just figuring out where I wanted to put the receiver, and that's kind of a personal thing. You absolutely can get a receiver and a battery pack in this hatch. It would just be tight. I didn't want to do that. I really like it. I plan to fly it a lot. It's going to be in our truck on the way to the field quite often, and I want changing packs out to be easier. So if you feel the way I do, we gave you an option. There are other places to put it if you want to, but it does make the assembly more difficult when you do that. When it comes to flying, super smooth, stable airplane. Like I said, this is my favorite 1100 millimeter warbird that I've ever flown. I felt that way back when I had my first Mark I, and I feel that way after flying this. It just solidifies that for me. And it's an intermediate airplane. Listen, no Spitfire is a beginner airplane. They're just not. The ground handling is too tough for somebody new, and they're too responsive for somebody new. But an intermediate pilot can absolutely build and fly this airplane with no problem. I think they might be challenged by long, slow scale takeoffs from a smooth surface. That really takes some real rudder skill to do that well. But other than that, flying it for an intermediate pilot should be pretty basic. If you have some reasonably sensitive airplane and tail dragger experience, you will be able to adapt to what the Spitfire asks of you and have a really good time with it, I think. You know, I just can't, there's so many things about this airplane that I love. I can't say enough. I'm kind of fanboying here a little bit because I'm just such a Spitfire nut, but this is just such a good example. Such a good example. We're going to leave a link in the description where you can get one from HobbyKing. It'll go straight to the page where you can order one. Don't forget, if you live in the UK or surrounding areas, there's a cheaper shipping option now, so this is definitely doable for you without the crazy shipping costs that you used to have to deal with. So that's a real plus. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps our channel. We appreciate you watching our production. We really hope that you enjoyed it. We're proud of it. And we hope that you'll join us next week when we will have something else cool with wings. It won't be this cool, but it'll be, you know, I mean, it'll be kind of cool.